Okay, welcome to this April-May 2023 edition of Protein Production Technology International. And continuing with our feature on alternative seafoods, we're pleased now to be speaking with Michelle Wolf, who is the CEO of New Wave Foods. They're a New York-based company that is producing a plant-based shrimp. Now, we know that demand for plant-based proteins is climbing every day, and as the consumer base for vegetarian and vegan meat alternatives grows, many are looking for new ways to eat their old favourites, and they don't come any more favourite than shrimp. It's certainly one of those. So, Michelle, welcome to you. It's very nice to have you with us.
It's great to be with you, Nick. Thanks for having me today.
First off, how did you get into the food tech space? I think I read somewhere that you used to work for L'Oreal.
I did. So my background is actually in engineering, and I did do a very short stint at L'Oreal, but just found that I had this desire to have more impact with my career, especially within food. And I was starting to understand like the connection between our food system and sustainability. And working on shampoo just wasn't quite filling that itch for me, if you will. So I had moved across the country to be at the center of the plant-based movement over in California. I started New Wave Foods because of exactly what you said about shrimp is one of the most consumed seafoods, but in my opinion is the poster child for issues that we can have in our seafood supply chains. And I was looking at the meat alternative space and I said, hey, no one's working on seafood. There's an opportunity for shrimp here. So we went from there in terms of developing a product and now in the market and getting into restaurants across the country.
Yeah. I mean, some of the people that I've interviewed for this feature, they're looking at cod and they're looking at salmon and things like that. And there are specific conservation concerns with those particular species. Are there any of those concerns with shrimp? I mean, why did you focus on shrimp in particular, apart from, I guess, the volume? It's one of the most eaten seafoods, I believe, or consumed seafoods, I should say, in the USA.
Yes, it is globally too as well. So
Okay.
it was because of the volume and because shrimp is actually number 3 in terms of greenhouse gas impact after beef and chicken. So there's a lot of emissions that happen in shrimp farms. There is mangrove destruction, which happens on the coast of Southeast Asia, which, boosts that number as well. And whenever you take out a mangrove to put in a shrimp farm, you're releasing all this carbon and this great ecosystem that's actually filtering our ocean, helping reduce ocean acidification. You're removing that, and then that's contributing to the greenhouse gas impact as well. And unfortunately, with these shrimp farms, they only have about a 5-year shelf life before you're moving down the coastline to redo the whole process all over again. So between that and then all of the other issues that you see with microplastics, overfishing, excessive bycatch, all of those things have put a lot of stress on our shrimp supply chains. And since it's so well liked, we said, hey, if we can create a tasty alternative, we can reduce some of those issues and reduce those pressures that are happening on our that supply chain as well.
Yeah, so there's a big impact to be had if we can sort of nail this particular breed
Yes,
of
yes,
seafood. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. I mean, you talked about it there, looking at the bigger picture. I mean, there are lots of companies out there pursuing different types of plant-based meat alternatives. Why seafood in particular instead of another high-volume plant-based meat?
Yeah, I think when I was getting into the space, there was already starting to be a proliferation of burgers, patties, starting to be chicken, and now there's really been a proliferation of chicken. And our oceans are so important to our broader ecosystem. We actually get most of our oxygen to our oceans. And to ignore the oceans, to ignore sustainability, is to ignore like 75% or around 70% of our planet. So I said, hey, I always like to think of myself as fighting for the underdog. Our oceans at the time were certainly not being, we're sort of the underdog in terms of sustainability conversations. So that's why I chose to focus on seafood because of the need there. Compared to, there's a lot of fabulous folks working on beef, chicken, and some of those other terrestrial meat alternatives.
Yeah. I mean, this focus on New Wave Foods itself as a company, when was it established, and what was the genesis of that, and when did you become involved?
Yeah, so I've been there since the very beginning because of my background. I did a lot of the initial formulations on the product. We have been around since late 2015, so we spent quite a few years with an R&D perfecting the product. It was in 2021 that we entered distribution through Dot Foods. Dot Foods is a redistributor in the food service industry, and they get us access to over 3,500 doors within the food service industry that we can sell into. So over the last year, we've been getting our distribution foothold through Dot and then selling into restaurants over the last year as well. And, across the food service industry as well. So not just restaurants, but colleges and universities, um, corporate dining. So if you think about, your Silicon Valley Tech campus and the dining halls there, we also do sell into those places as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big portion of the market. I mean, we're going to come on to food service a little bit later on. When you said perfecting the product and perfecting the R&D, what does the perfect shrimp product look like, plant-based shrimp product look like? And
Yeah.
how have you tweaked it over the years to come with the to come with the product that you've got today?
Yeah, so shrimp is really interesting because the people love the texture because I think it's so differentiated compared to finned fish, especially. I think a lot of the technologies that were developed around plant-based meats are a little bit easier to apply to finned fish than a shrimp. So we really had to take a totally different approach into how we develop this product because when you think about a shrimp, you have this pretty firm bite going into it. Then you have this sort of burst of, flavor and texture and tastiness. So trying to recapture that had been a challenge to get the texture first. So we worked on that. And then a surprising, for me at least, part of this was getting the right shrimp flavor because we wanted to use all natural flavors and you're trying to create shrimp flavor without shrimp. So even just defining, what are those flavors in there? And you get some of the basics like, okay, there's umami, there's saltiness. But as we were working on it, we said, okay, there's this like fresh ocean flavor that we're having a hard time capturing the product. So we did some things like boiling seaweed and trying to figure out like what would give us that flavor. But eventually we have a fantastic team of food scientists and like culinary experts who are able to get us that right flavor profile to complement the texture in our product.
I guess it's a challenge to create a product so complex, but keep down the number of ingredients because we don't want to be accused of, you know, having lists and lists of various different ingredients that nobody can pronounce. So how do you strike that balance between sort of labeling of, not labeling of ingredients, but the number of ingredients in a product and achieving the perfect taste, texture?
Yeah, so there's been really some good thought leaders in the, I guess, ingredient space. You can think about Whole Foods. I think in food service, Panera Bread has been another great example where they've put out lists to say, hey, we're not going to take in products that have these ingredients in them. So
Mhm.
I think early on in the development process, we made sure to set guardrails around, what ingredients we would include in the product using those lists as guidelines. And I think just making sure that, I have to say we didn't struggle as much as maybe some other companies did about having to narrow down the ingredient list. We got to a point where the product was very tasty. We were like, hey, this has a fraction of the ingredients that some of the patties do. And we were able to, feel confident in shipping the product based on what we had developed up into that point. And I think a big part of that was also too because we set these guardrails early on in the process. Because as they say, I think necessity is the mother of invention. So I think sometimes having a wide open development plan can actually be to your disservice rather than putting some structure around it, because then you have to be a little bit more creative about how you're developing products too.
Yeah. Of the ingredients, what are the main constituents in there?
Yeah.
Are
So
you using a pea protein or?
we use a seaweed derived ingredient that gives the texture that I was talking about earlier. And then we use mung bean protein for the protein content. And because of that seaweed ingredient matrix, we've been able to load more protein into our product than anyone else working on shrimp right now. So we've been very happy with how that has turned out. And then we use some things that help with the mouthfeel, like sunflower oil. And then, as I mentioned before, natural flavors to round out the flavor profile.
Yeah. Now, we've talked about the product. What's about the process itself? What's particularly unique about the way you're doing it? I was talking with a company yesterday, and because they don't use extrusion, they can create a product that basically looks uncooked when it's uncooked, and then it takes on that cooked appearance when you cook it. Can you engineer that into your products?
Yeah, so a lot of shrimp is actually purchased pre-cooked anyway. So we did develop our product to be a ready to heat rather than ready to kind of fully cooked product. Because as we thought about the food service operator and the challenges and, they're a customer and what they're going through right now, they are having labor shortages. If they are getting labor, it's a little bit less skilled. So we wanted to make sure that the product was something that was easy to go from the freezer to, for our breaded shrimp, the fryer, and then to your plate. So we were really focused on the customer at the center of this as we were developing the product and making sure it was going to be easy to use. Because what I have found in listening to, panels at the National Restaurant Show is while a lot of the food service industry, they're like, hey, I get the trends around plant-based. This is interesting. If there's too much messing around that they have to do with the product or special cooking process, or even in some cases getting special equipment, they're like, I don't want to mess with this. I don't want to bring it in. So I think part of that was just keeping our customers at the center of that product development process too, as we came up with the product.
Yeah. Among the challenges that you find, I mean, there's challenges everywhere in this sector, from regulations to consumer acceptance. But what have been your biggest challenges in the development side of things, and how did you overcome those?
Yeah, I guess in terms of the product development themselves or on the regulatory side.
Either or. Well, start with the product. Because I understand that the regulations is a slightly different thing for plant-based products than it
Yeah.
is, for instance, CELAG.
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing for us, honestly, was finding a co-manufacturing partner and scaling up. So getting that, something on the bench that tastes great, that is a whole process. And again, we have a great team to get there, internal team. But then when you start factoring in a third party like a co-manufacturer, that creates multiple levels of complexity. And you're also trying to find a partner who says, hey, like, you're almost selling into them as well and saying, hey, this is going to be a big deal. We're going to have a lot of volume. We don't necessarily have it now. We're going to have to do some R&D with you. And you're trying to tell that story to them and get them excited about it too. So finding that
Mm.
co-manufacturing partner to scale up, I
Yeah.
think was much more of a process than I expected and took a lot more time than I expected. And I think it's something as we look at the products on the shelf today, anyone who's been able to get across that and scale up and get their unit economics down, like that should not be shorted as something that is insignificant. That is very significant to have a product on the shelf and scaled up because it is not easy with these novel products in plant-based foods.
Yeah, and once you've got it on the shelf, you've got to market it as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I mean, you were talking about that co-manufacturing process. I mean, you're essentially handing over your baby, aren't you? So you've really got to make sure that you're working with the right partner who can, take your vision to reality.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And it's always a balance. So, as I think about building the business, we have a brand, we're trying to sell products. So, we want to use our capital to grow the market. So, really focusing on sales and marketing. And what working with co-mans do, yes, you really have to have a lot of trust. And that's where I think the vetting process and finding the right partner is so important to that. But we don't have to worry about significant capital costs. We still have fairly good control, or we have very good control over how the product is made, the quality standards because of the partnership we have with our manufacturers. And it allows us to put capital to work to really teach folks about a product that is unfamiliar to them. As much as plant-based products have been around now for quite a few years, I forget sometimes that the concept of a plant-based shrimp is still very new. So being able to put that funds towards education around the product, that it tastes good, that you can use it just like shrimp, has been really important. And then partnering the right way with co-mans so that we can fuel the market is how we've approached all this.
I mean, it's a big challenge for startups in the sector. I mean, would you recommend co-manufacturing as, as a go-to market strategy?
I think it's going to be a case by case basis, quite frankly. For us, we knew that while there isn't a lot of equipment out there that is specifically designed for plant based foods, we were able to, I guess, retrofit some things to our process, kind of create a modular process where we can, slot in different equipment if we need to for that. But I know that there's a lot of new technologies out there that they can't do that with. So I would say it also depends on your business strategy too. We knew that we wanted to grow a brand and sell in, and we wanted to fuel that. I know other folks are really investing in the technology and focusing on reducing costs for their particular product. So in that case, it might make more sense to have a facility to your own. But I think it depends on your overall strategy and what you're trying to bring to life.
Mhm. Now, it's a small community, I mean, it's growing, obviously, but it's a small community, the alternative seafood market. I heard the other day that there's even a WhatsApp group that some of the members in it are on, and they all exchange, exchange pleasantries and platitudes. So you probably keep an eye on developments from your, I'm not going to say competitors, but your partner collaborators. Is there anything else in the market that has really impressed you? You've sort of seen it or tasted it and just thought, that's blown me away.
Yeah, yeah. I think to your point about the What's That Group, what's really cool about the, I think even
You're on it.
yeah, the future of food in general is everyone's working on the same goal and the same mission, and everyone has the same, I think, ethos. So that creates a certain camaraderie around everybody. But when we think about how we are, or I guess if I think about, I'm trying to think about a product that's really impressed me. What I have really been interested in is more seaweed products. So products that come from seaweed like ours, just raw seaweed as well. We use something that is processed from seaweed, but how folks are incorporating that into their meals too. Seaweed is so cool because it is a very sustainable ingredient. It grows like by the foot almost per day. So we talked about the release of carbon in our mangroves for shrimp. Seaweed is growing so quickly, it's capturing that carbon, it's reducing ocean acidification. And I think it has a lot of opportunities in the ingredient space to be developed into other, bases for plant-based meat alternatives. Even in the cultivated space, I think there's some opportunities. So I'm really excited about where the future of seaweed is going to take us in the future of food.
Mm-hmm. I was just wondering, do you sort of showcase yourself at any general fish industry events? Do you have any gauge of what the conventional fish sector or seafood sector thinks of the types of products that you guys are developing?
Yeah, I think there's the very vocal ones I find on social media who feel threatened. And I think it's sad that they feel threatened because I've always seen our brand as a yes and.
Mhm.
I really think that it's not about trying to convince everybody to go vegan. I think that's going to be an uphill battle that will take a much longer time than I think people realize.
Yeah.
But I would love to see, folks swapping out one meal a week for something plant-based as a starting point. And I think if we can, convince folks to make small changes, those can have a ripple effect across a population and really be impactful.
Mhm.
So that's how I kind of think about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the vegans only take up a small percentage of the market, whereas the flexitarian, people like me, are a much bigger market grab. We're going to come on to the consumers in a minute, but food service, you mentioned it earlier, that's an important part of your business model. Um, I mean, what is the thinking behind that generally? And might you have any plans for retail in the future?
Yeah. So we went into food service first because that is where seafood across the board, including shrimp, is most consumed. It's something like 70 to 80% of folks go outside of the home to eat seafood. And that's because they don't like how it makes their house smell. They don't know how to cook it. They don't want to handle it because they're worried about salmonella risk, for example. So we went into food service because of that. And also, you're seeing a lot of influencer chefs being on the voices for the plant-based movement as well. So
Yeah.
as we think about getting it to market, that's why we went into food service initially as well for this. We are
Mhm.
working on plans for retail and are excited to, start talking about that a little bit later this year.
Yeah, there's a company called Redefine Meat, who I'm sure you're aware of here in Europe, and they have Marco Pierre White among their ambassadors. Are you guys working any sort of celebrity chefs
Yes.
in your sort of?
Yes, so we've announced this a few months ago, and we just came out with our first video with this collaboration. So we worked with Chef Brian Duffy, who was on Bar Rescue, and he was the one, kind of the nice guy coming in to help out with like creating these wonderful food concepts for these restaurants and kind of, taking more of like a gastropub lens for all of this. So he actually brought in the product in one of his restaurant concepts, sold out of it in a weekend and said, "Hey, I want to work with you guys. This is so cool. I want to be a part of it." And it's just been, he's so down to earth and so fun to work with and just an like ultimate professional. And he's just been a fantastic partner throughout this as well.
Uh-huh. That's it's good to have that sort of personality on board, isn't it? I know there's a lot of stars out there that are investing in this space and want to be seen as part of this space. In the years ahead, how do you see this sector evolving? As a sector, I include the plant-based products that you're developing, but also cell-based or even fermentation-derived seafood products.
Yeah, I think the plant-based industry is going to continue to expand. What we're seeing is that the trends that are driving plant-based eating, they're not going anywhere. People still want to eat better for the environment. We talked about flexitarian, but that's shifting to more of people calling it a climatarian diet, where people are like, hey, I just want to eat better for the planet.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to cultivated and fermentation, what you'll start to see is probably hybrid products coming out together. So using sort of plant-based products as a base, starting to pull in some of those ingredients. I know they have their own sort of separate challenges from us, but I know that as the cost of the, especially plant-based products come down, people overcome some of these scale-up challenges. We're just going to continue to see more and more plant-based products as the years go on.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned those climatarians there. It's not a phrase I've come across yet, but I guess it's a demographic thing, isn't it? This as we sort of move, all the old fogies like me disappear. These younger generations, Gen Alpha and Gen Z, they're the ones that are going to be driving this market forward. I mean, what do you think the tipping point will be for these particular types of alternative seafoods to really take off?
Yeah, I really think that cost is going to be a big driver for this. We're living in a time of unprecedented inflation, especially within my lifetime. So if I'm, a Gen Z, I'm like a young millennial, but if for that generation that's really just coming like right out of college, or Gen Alpha who's like going into college right now, their pockets aren't very deep right now. And we talk about sort of wealth across generations. Unfortunately, especially in younger generations, that hasn't necessarily caught up in some of them. So I think there are a lot of folks who have a will to eat in a better way, but to really get them to start adopting these products and for them to become more mainstream, price is going to be something to focus on. And I know that's a big point that we're working on too, is to continue to drive down those costs within our production process and lower the price over time. I had a few folks say, hey, are you going to raise your price? There's inflation. Everybody's raising their prices right now. And I was like, no, like we need to kind of hold steady where we are and, continue to sell for people to have confidence in our products and to continue to buy them.
Michelle, we're nearly time up now, but what's next for New Wave Foods? What big announcements can we expect over the next couple of months?
Yes. So I am really excited about a very cool announcement coming out around a product award that we were getting that's coming out in the next few days. So excited to talk about that. And then honestly, just kind of continuing to sell in. We have distribution in all of the major US cities. So it's really about just continuing to push the product out into those cities here. We're working on some opportunistic international opportunities. So I think we're pretty happy that, externally there's been a lot of discussion around the plant-based industry, but I can tell you internally, the company continues to grow, and I can confidently say, it's company's never been better.
Yeah, well, that's great. I mean, you're achieving what many companies out there can only dream of. So thank you very much for your time. It's been great to speak with you today, and it's going to be fantastic to feature you in this article.